where these, if I cut these off, they'll sprout new shoots, new branches, and I can redefine the tree. So the form can vary greatly from very tiny. I had a red pine from the Northwest that I grew from seed, and it was in pot about this big, and it was 5 years old, and it was like this tall. You know, so you can, it depends how much, of course, the smaller the pot, the more attention you're going to have to pay to it baking, you know, drying out and dying on you. So when you neglect them like I have, they become too leggy and they lose their shape, their branch definitions. It's much. Okay, so in Japanese, they find some specific styles, and sometimes you'll see these, you know, like the ones that they're showing. Probably the most common is a formal upright, and you notice how the branches are very structured, and the forestry thing's always an odd number. The broom style is more like what you see in an oak tree that's planted out in the middle of lots of open space and you see that some with fruit trees and stuff. Here was an attempt, but after winter dieback, this is a quince. And after winter dieback, it lost a lot of branches and has really suffered, but it did bloom this spring. But you can see it's got some pear slug damage. I tend to not do enough pest management. I just don't like to use those chemicals. So it is what it is. But by difference, you can look at this quince. This is a pump style. So it's actually off the same bush. You know, doing cutting off the same bush, but it's grown into a totally different style. So to some extent, it's what do you want to do with that tree? Occasionally you get, say, a planting of two. It's like a mother and child kind of concept. This is a little boxwood. So these were boxwood cuttings that were grown for 2 years in the ground and then lifted and put into a little pot. And in another year or so, I will repot this probably into something a little smaller. It just doesn't want to go. Whoops, it went. Oh, it's catching up. Oh boy. Let's go back some. Okay, the next one. Next. There. Tools. You have an array of tools. You buy a bonsai beginning kit. They're mostly carbon steel. They rust badly. If I were starting out again, I might do stainless tools, which are like a third more in the price, but they don't rust. And then a little steel wool, WD-40 to clean those up, no problem. But you have a variety of root hooks shown there. So there are things like this for raking roots out, or this, or my favorite tool is chopsticks. But again, it depends on your tree roots, what works for you. The next thing over is branch cutters for different sized branches. And the way that they're cut, when they go in and cut on a tree, they make a flush cut, even maybe slightly inward with this curve that's here, so that when the wound eventually heals, it's not a huge knob, like you'll see on some trees that get a big knob where the wound was. And if you do get one, there's another little tool called a knob cutter, which I tend not to use too much because I kind of like my knobs. The thing you really need is good scissors. I like these stainless scissors. They do a lot of root work. They'll do a lot of trimming. You know, they're multi-purpose. You need maybe a needle nose pliers and a wire cutter. The bonsai style of wire cutter is very different from your toolbox wire cutter. If you use this on wire that you've applied to a tree, you're going to cut into the bark. So what's different about a bonsai style is it's actually got the taper or the wedge cut on both sides of the tool. And when you cut, it doesn't dig into the bark of the tree to take wire off. And you generally have to remove wire before winter. Other tools like tweezers, that's for weeding, or saw, knife, stone for sharpening. Then things like you might want grafting wax, you might want sealer, like pruning sealers. That little elm, Ulmus parvifolia, it will, you need to seal the ends of your cuts or it's going to dry out and drop leaves. Where the Benjamin figs, their sap will do that sealing for them. They'll get that white sap on them, sticky, and self-seal. So it depends on the tree. And other things you might want is fruto, something to encourage rooting. I love Super Thrive when I transplant. I also have a mycorrhiza because we're using a soilless mix, that there's not anything, it's pretty much sterile, that you need to put some of the bacteria and fungus and things that are in native plantings into your soil. Another way to do that is to save a little bit of the soil that came out of the pot it was in and mix that into your bonsai mix. So there are different ways to do that. Up at the top, you see a lot of screens, and they can be, you know, pre-made little round ones, or they can, you know, if you've ever done those cross stitches with plastic sheets, grids, or whatever, that's all they are. These are black, but I got red ones and clear ones, whatever I find at a yard sale, and you just cut them to size.
What do you use this for?
Use those to cover your big drain holes. So a tray normally has a couple of drain holes in it, and you want to keep the pill bugs and stuff out of your plant. And it gives you a place to put wires down for anchoring, or some big trays will have multiple holes for multiple wire locations. So it just depends. Next, when we get there. Soil. So I'm going to pass this around, let you take a look at some of the things that are in the soilless mix. We've got the critical thing is you need to sieve your soil. You want lots of spaces for air and moisture. You want something that will absorb some moisture, like humus, or sharp granite, particularly pines. The sharp granite mix tends to be better for them. Fired clays, you can find that in some pure kitty litters that are actually fired clay. Akadama is what they use in Japan, and there'll be a little bag of that, and that's a fired clay. And I couldn't find them here, so I got some turf mix, which they use on ball diamonds. It's a fired clay. So you'll do a mix of that. Sieving is critical. It's virtually, depending on the type, like the tropical, you're probably going to have more organic content. And for that, I'm using the fine bark. It's just a real fine bark mix. For my organic, you generally don't put peat in because it's going to have trouble with drainage. Sometimes, if you really want moss on the top and stuff, sometimes they'll make a clay mix with some peat in it and use that as sort of a top layer. That's also going to prevent the water and the nutrients from going down into the soil and fertilize. So, kind of a double-edged sword. All right, next. Are you doing it or am I?
I'm doing it.
Okay. Generally, when you pick out a tray, you want something that complements the design. So if you look at these, a lot of times the container that's been chosen has to do with the bark color. So again, harmony or calmness. The exception to that is some of the tropicals and anything that flowers. You may go into, a blue or a green, something different. Here's one that's kind of harmonizing, and here's one that is. So again, it's up to you. Generally, they avoid white or black, seen as either too powerful, overwhelming, that you see that instead of the tree. So generally, you try and match something close to a color on the bark. Of course, if you can go smaller, it's going to make the tree look older in scale to the pot, where a lot of these are more like bonsais and training. They haven't been reduced down to very small pots. Next. So they come in all different shapes, but there's one in there that's, your basic Lowe's clay pot. Again, that would be fine for a semi-cascade or something where it comes out and hangs down some. That would look great in that style pot. Generally, the more masculine the tree, the more it's usually in a rectangular shape. Again, it depends what you're trying to show off. With the figs, these crazy air roots. I mean, we call it a Benjamin fig, but it's a Chinese banyan tree, is what they really are, which is a very giant tree, and with lots of roots that come down, that kind of thing. And so I was looking more at the roots than the branches. So again, it's up to you. Plastics are generally used for training, and they can be like the little one that's being passed around with the soil mix in it, or they can be, and they come in different sizes. Advantage is they don't lose a lot of moisture through the container, and they don't break easily. They aren't expensive. This is a heavier polypropylene. These don't crack in winter freezing, all those kinds of things. I've had a lot of nice Chinese pots that have spalled over the winter, haven't survived the freezing. Probably should have been tropical in them and made it a house plant. But because these things winter outside. Next. You can make your own tray out of the slab. This used to have a beautiful grouping of spruce on an island, but sometimes when you defer watering to somebody else, there's one that gets missed. And it was a critical failure for this grouping, but I made that was a marble tray that I then epoxied rocks onto, and can see where the trees would have been. And from the other side, it was kind of like they were on islands. So next. Once you select the tray, you want a clean tray. You cover the drain holes. I just use kind of a figure 8 with wire coming up. You know, I would put this in the pot and then usually come up from, that would be hidden by the bottom. And then these would be bent down. And next, you remove all the soil from your plant. So today, we fly through this a little faster. We might get to see what this will be. This is a ewe that last night I took roots off of. And that's, here's the rest of the roots. It was grown in this pot. It was together like that. And some roots broke off in doing this. And they're, to my disappointment, great disappointment, I picked this tree out because I was so pleased at this wide area right here, which was the soil line. Then as I started bare rooting it, that disappears and it's this skinny trunk instead of this wide. And so even though I spent a couple hours looking at all the things I had at the store, you know, trying to pick one out that would be good for this, I somewhat have failed. So again, it's what will we get when we do this? But you take off all the soil. And because of that, it was so deep, I actually used a saw to cut through these big hard roots that were going on down. And believe me, a ewe is not easy to saw through. So hopefully this guy will live when we get to him. Next. Sometimes when you buy a nursery plant, which I think was this guy, it might have been this guy, was how he started out. I didn't do him as a cascade, but he could have been as a cascade. Found slugs, found an ant nest in it, all those normal types of things. Next. So you bare root it, and if you look at this one, tons of black roots. That is not a good sign. That is basically dead roots that have rotted in the pot. The ones that are reddish and lighter color are the ones that are actually feeding this plant. So you end up with, if you have to remove most of the roots because they're dead, you end up needing to remove at least that much foliage. So like here, I've got at least 50% of the roots gone. By the time we're done with this, it's probably going to be 50 to 75% of the foliage will be gone. Next. The general shape, almost all those traditional styles, other than the broom, even the broom has somewhat of a triangle shape. So if you look at this, triangle's going two ways. It's got a little bit of a triangle this way, and with more definition, I could improve that with maybe letting one of these branches come down and fill out a little further. But it's also got a triangle that's kind of going back. And generally, you'll position the trunk a little bit coming towards you, towards the viewer, where the side the front of that tree is. So a little bit to engage the viewer a little bit. But the triangle is a big part of the harmony. Next. So with a pine, you're showing, you know, the 2 year, the 3 year, which I'm probably about a 3-year on this little guy. We'll let it grow up. Then you see him, he's defining lower branches and letting that whole top grow up. And it's a sacrifice. It's growing trunk size, feeding the plant, and then eventually that'll be cut off. So there's a certain amount of, oh, do I do it or not? Do I do it or not? When do I do it? You know, so you can see there with a on the top is a larch. You can see the definition, and the bottom is a juniper, which this baby is, and it's of course not defined at this point. Okay. Next.
It's going up. Here we go.
Oh, okay. Go back one. Wiring. Generally, you wire to stabilize the trunk because you've repotted it and the roots aren't holding it down, and the wind will just knock it over and it'll be uprooted. So generally, I'll have at least one wire coming up from the tray that I'll wrap on the trunk to stabilize it until the roots hold. But if you do have to wire a tree to bring all its branches down, you don't want your wires crossing. It looks horrible. And believe me, I have done it before. It really does look bad. And there are ways around wiring. Sometimes you can take say like, if I wanted to bring this down, and with Japanese maple, you'll snap a branch. Believe me, they're very brittle. If I wanted to bring this down, I could put something soft on here and a weight and bring a wire down to the tree. And I may do that eventually. I may decide to lower these branches. I don't know. But that's one of the ways we do branch shaping. Okay, next. So you have on the left an unwired tree. Everything wants to go up. And on the right, you see there one that's been wired and shaped. And after a growing season, you'll take those wires off and hopefully the branches stay down. Some species, they'll still try to turn back up. So, but generally you have to take the wire off in the winter time. Okay.
One. But why is that?
Freezing, cold. The wire's a big conductor of cold. You know. So, and you don't want that spring growth spurt to end up with scars of the wire. You'll see this little elm, which I got as a purchase. When I looked at it, I think it was shown from this side, but you'll see right here, there's a big indent. That was probably where a wire dug in and was left too long. So again, we'll see when it happens in time. Next. So there's a one that's, you know, a fairly undefined new tree, but it's got more foliage than this one. That they basically had maybe a double trunk, and they basically took one off and made it look old by peeling the bark and carving on it. Kind of like doing this. Okay. You still have all the issues of growing anything. You can over fertilize and burn it. You can under fertilize it. You can put it in too much sun and burn it, or it's in too much shade. I have lots of oak trees, so I'm having trouble finding places where things that need full sun, like pine, aren't having a good place to get that full sun. So all those things are important. Next. When you select the plant, if it has a graft, you'd really like the graft to be down low on the tree. I've seen some Japanese maple where the graft is like up here. And that's never gonna be a good bonsai. Because you want that graft to be down low. You would like trunk flare, you would like some movement in the trunk, or if you're gonna do formal, you want that very nice straight trunk. You wanna look for branching and bud nodes. Good thing about it, this is a U, is it's pretty flexible until you get bigger branches. So that's good. Almost all the things you buy in a nursery are basically pop out. I mean, it's sad. But you definitely don't want circling roots that are choking the tree. All right, next. So this one is from Vietnam, and I just thought it was lovely. So I put it in there. Questions at this point? No, okay. Okay, all right.
You're about to show us how to do this view, right?
Yeah, or attempt to do it.
Is that, what time of year do you do your heavy pruning? Do you do your heavy pruning in spring, or do you do it?
Spring, early summer, generally just like in the garden, you don't prune a lot after August.
Yeah.
You know, well, they need time to get ready for winter. And generally when the sap starts flowing, you might, see the buds swell. Maybe that's a good time, or maybe let them open and feed the plants a little bit and then do some pruning. And a lot of things like a Japanese maple or a juniper or spruce, you don't really need scissors. You can just pinch that new growth back to cause branching, increased branching. So like this is leggy. If I wanted to get this to grow more full, I just pinch the tip out. So you don't always need scissors.
So even if you're taking like half the tree off or half the trunk off, you do that in the spring?
Generally, I would repot in February or so. Or a ginkgo, I would wait till I actually see buds swelling. They're very woundable. So every tree is different.
Question. So these are outside.
Most of them are outside. The tropicals, like the figs, I'll bring those in like a house plant. The rest of these will be outside.
Would they be happy on a screening porch?
As long as it's getting cold and they have enough light. I mean, they still need light, and they still need moisture, and they still need, even in the winter, you might have to periodically water, just like you would if you brought something into your garage. You might have to water it every
So
couple of
where would
weeks.
you put them outside if you didn't?
Well, I've got a big box that I put them in, and then I bury them in lots of pine straw. And this year I'm gonna add a windbreak, because we had that 50-mile-an-hour -25 wind chill last year, and it severely damaged and killed a number. I had other junipers and other plants. I've got a sequoia that's slowly moving its way back, but see if I can do a better job on protecting it from wind than I did last year. So this is because I'm interested in survival. I'm going with a much bigger pot than maybe ultimately long term this year will have. I've got the drain holes covered, and I've got a couple of wires here to position it and hold it for the trunk. So you can't see, you're welcome to move too. So I have made up a mix. The soil that this thing was grown in was almost all bark pines and potting soil. It didn't have very good drainage. And I'm gonna fill this And any scoop, you don't have to have a bonsai scoop, you know. Your hands, like most gardeners. I don't know about you, but I can't plant anything with gloves on. I can weed, but I can't plant. I don't know why. I just need to touch the baby.
What's the mixture do?
This is bark fines, perlite, granite, icodonal, and turf mix. It's a lot of those things that went around in the box. So I've got it filled here, partially. So I've got it like a good inch or so in the bottom, for roots to go into. And then I've got kind of a mound for underneath the center of the trunk. And generally that's about 1/3 of the width of your pot is where you want to center that tree. If you set it right in the middle, if it's a round pot, that works, but not a rectangular. Visually, it just doesn't work for a rectangular pot. So, poor baby. You can see some of the roots were starting to wrap. We're going to bring those out. This is a good thing to have. Don't want them to dry out.
Wow, where'd you get that?
You can buy one from Cumberland County Master Gardeners if you come to something. We do. I got those online. I liked it. So I'm going to kind of pull the roots out, and then I have to make a decision. Where is the front of this tree? Okay, I'm going to go with the front of the tree is here.
Why?
Why? Because this big fat branch here, I'm probably going to lose. And it looks like the main trunk is going in there. Although, okay, I'm going to turn it. You convinced me. Okay, so maybe I want to switch which end is. So you tend to get roots that'll kind of wrap on the short end and then stretch out on the long end, something kind of like that. Maybe about 1/3. Normally I do this, I'm sitting down. What do you think? Is that about 1/3 of the way? Okay, and what I'm hoping for eventually is that I get more roots down here on this straight part of the trunk. I get some roots that are coming out higher, and I could shorten it into a shorter pot. So I'm gonna just put a little bit of soil in here. And I might get help with one of you. I'm gonna need chopsticking. To get this tree sort of stuck in here, position.
I believe this big thing.
It does not want to stay there, does it? So what we're going to do is we're going to put more soil in here. I say soil, but it's, you know, media, soilless media. We're going to put it, and then what we have to do is actually get this into between all the roots. And no air spaces, no big pockets. You know how when you water something, if you plant it in big air bubbles come up? Don't want that. And so it takes an extensive amount of time to chopstick. Yeah, I'm gonna let you sit down.
So you wired it.
I haven't, I just did a wire to try and hold it while you do this. Okay? And we're just gonna keep adding soil as she's chopsticking it. I'll let you sit down. Okay, now we're gonna talk about there. So I kind of peeked at branches. And like I said, there was that big wide with sort of 3 branches that I was all excited about. And now what I've got is this straight stalk down here. So that's kind of a bummer. But we'll see what we get. So my initial concept of where I was gonna go is, so while she's doing that, I'm gonna start taking some things off. This is a branch cutter. But
Right.
I'm gonna turn it just a little bit here. And go further up. Okay. One off. So you only get one shot at this when you make the decision. So keep chopsticking because it's got a long way to go. And when she gets tired, somebody else can help her.
Should I add more? Or you want me to?
Yeah, keep adding. So what have I got in? I don't know, but I'm shortening this. So I can get in here and see where things are going.
Is that the only media that you're going to use in the life of this bonsai? Or will you add soil sometime?
I will repot every 2 years, ideally. If it's a young tree that you're developing, you'll repot every 2 years, or maybe if it has exceptional growth 1 year, you might have to repot after 1. But generally, the older it gets, the more time you can go between repotting. However, these 2 forest groups are about 5 years beyond where they should have been repotted.
But you use the same soil mixture
Yeah.
for all those changes.
Can you do shrubs like elderberry?
Elderberries you saw, they come up like this. They also have the compound leaf that makes it very hard, like a black locust, to find that. So I would look for something more like, if you want that kind of shape, maybe an aurelia as a house plant, or because an elderberry has those. It's very hard to get it to branch where you want it to branch and to fill out when you want it to fill out. A blueberry might be a better choice. If you wanted a berry plant. They make beautiful bonsai. You see how it really takes a lot to work it in. And yeah. It's not very stable in here right now for. And,
Is there one you'd recommend for a beginner?
Junipers are probably one of the most forgiving. I would not do a fruit tree just like apples here, 10 springs and all that. So there were probably some pear slugs on these plants, same kind of issues that I would probably avoid. If you were digging one that had some nice trunk or something, that would be fabulous to do. You might have to do it and then put it back in the ground for a year or two to get it to live, or put it into a bigger pot. You may have to, redevelop its root system.
So do you know what you want that to look like, or are you kind of just designing?
I'm winging it.
So, you're what?
I'm winging it.
Okay.
I'm just trying to see where is the main trunk at this point. Okay, it's in here. Yeah, it takes a lot more soil than you think it will. You just look at pot size.
This may be a dumb question, but when you say every 2 years you repot it, is that to allow it to grow bigger or keep it from growing bigger?
It's to replace the soil media that's now getting compact. And so it's not gonna drain right, not gonna get the right amount of air
Okay.
in the soil.
So would you change the size of the pot?
You might go smaller if you wanna work towards the smaller, because it makes the tree look older. Or if it's in bad shape, you might have to go bigger and let it redevelop with good root mass. So you're just gonna make that decision when you see it. If it's a real mature tree, you don't probably want to bare root it. You're gonna do or it's the wrong time of year, like now, to do this repotting. You might do a wedge when you lift it out of its pot. It might be a rectangular brick. You might cut some pie wedges in it and put new soil in those and let roots grow into it versus try to redo the whole thing. But something like this little boxwood.
So when you repot, you're also root pruning.
Yeah. You want to give a spot where the roots can grow into it, and hopefully, like this, I'm trying to develop an exposed root here that'll get bigger, because it'll make the tree look like a wider base than it really has. So you're training roots and plant. How's it going?
Oh, great.
Okay, so
We are not quite in yet.
no, they need to go into the soil next.
Oh.
Then you
I'm
need
not any good at.
down into the soil. So it's harder than it looks, guys. It's the bottom line.
It looks kind of hard. So what if you wanted to buy one already done?
Already done?
Yes.
You get into problems like this, if the roots are not what you want, that it's too hard to shade.
What is the oldest known living bonsai?
A yew can grow 500 to 1,000 years. This is a a hybrid between a Japanese and an English use. So Texas Cuspidata and Texas Bacata. And it's called Texas with the X for hybrid media densiformis. And so it's grown more like a shrub, which is why I found it in a nursery, versus like Bacata would be very much like skinny tree form. So you want to know what you're buying, or sometimes that free tree is not worth it. Just like the free trees in Lowe's, maybe by the time they're there, they're hard to save. Although I had a lovely sweet gum that got the beautiful red leaves in the winter, fall, and it had been hit by lightning, and it was basically, it ran down the middle of it and rotted out the center of the trunk. And it did have a nice taper, so it was it turned out to be a lovely tree, and that was a freebie. But
And
it,
you bonsai'd it.
yeah. That one down here. Well,
So if you wanted to buy, purchase an already established bonsai,
the problem is it'll come in too small a pot, probably, to display it. Sometimes they even put, like at the mall, when you see little bonsais, it's almost like they plasticize the tops and none of the gravel will spill. You know, it's, you don't have something you can really work with very well. And you don't know how to take care of it. So is it noon yet? I don't want to keep anybody if they have to get back somewhere.
it is 1 o'clock.
Oh, your time. Yeah.
Yeah. And so these are set up to run for an hour. So if you need to continue on with the rest of your day, please feel free. If you would like to stay and watch the conclusion of this, please feel free to stay and keep on keeping on. While we are breaking, I want to present Julia with an appreciation for coming out and bringing all this material for us. This is a print from Terry Chandler, who is the brother of one of our master gardeners. So we very much appreciate it.
One of my other hobbies is painting.
If you are going to leave, please make sure you fill out the evaluation form and leave it with us before you depart. Otherwise,
One quick announcement.
yes,
Rockwood is next to the street fair on Monday
Down
night.
in there.
yeah.
Great fun. Lots of artists, bands, that kind of stuff. 6 to 9.
Getting enough soil over the top. We'll see, kind of.
Still going next to do your own.
So Julia, I'm not encouraging purchasing and establishment.
I would do your own from nursery stock, or it takes a long time, but like seedlings that are outside the door, it's gonna take 10 years to have something to work with.
That's what I'm thinking. I want one. I'm not gonna, I've been here in 10 years.
Well, but that's the advantage of starting with something like a juniper that you can
Okay.
find in a nursery.
And they went there one year. So the media is the same regardless of the tree.
Well, with the tropical, you're gonna use a higher mix of the organic portion,
And what
so.
would be an example of a tropical?
Heaps around it.
Say you wanted to do a TNT or a lantana or fig. They're gonna be a house plant basically for the winter. There's
Just
not.
for the winter.
I put them outside for the summer, but you're gonna use a higher percentage of organic in that mix. After time, you're gonna go almost the other direction, very little, 20% organic, maybe